Is it worth having a pre-marital agreement? If you want to know what a pre-marital agreement is and whether it's worth having one if you're getting married in England or Wales, then this is the blog for you. Hi, I'm Caitlin Jenkins and this is the Family Law Vlog. Today we're looking at the question of pre-marital agreements. What is a pre-marital agreement and is it worth you having one if you're going to get married in England and Wales? Well, the first point to note is that a pre-marital agreement is the same thing as a prenup, so that gets the terminology out of the way. Prenup, pre-marital agreement, they're the same thing. Basically, a prenup is an agreement that a couple who are going to get married sign. They agree it up front, they sign it before their wedding, and it basically sets out what they want to happen in the event of their divorce. Marital agreements in England don't tend to do is to set out what people are going to do during the course of the marriage, although sometimes some clarity and certainty about who's going to pay for what and how they're going to operate certain bank accounts can be helpful. But broadly, a prenup in England is talking about what happens in the unfortunate situation of somebody ending up in a divorce scenario. Why do people bother having a prenup, and are they valid anyway? Well, people tend to have a premarital agreement or a prenup if one or both of them is coming to the marriage with assets that they've already got. So perhaps somebody's had a business for a period of time and they want to make clear that if there's a problem in the marriage, they keep that business. Or perhaps somebody has inherited something, say a house from a grandparent. Or perhaps they both have assets that they anticipate inheriting or receiving from another source, perhaps from a gift from an elderly relative or sometime in the future. And they just want to be really clear at the outset as to what they both intend should happen in the event of a divorce. So if you think a prenup might be helpful for you and your potential spouse, is it worth actually having one? So are they binding? That's the question that we often get asked. And in fact, the way it's often put is, are they worth the paper they're written on? Well, if you'd asked that question 15 or 20 years ago, then the answer might well have been not particularly, because they weren't really looked at tremendously by a court, save in some quite exceptional circumstances. However, since around 2010, when there was a development in the case law, there is now a presumption that if people enter into a prenup and certain conditions are met, then they will be held to the terms of that prenup. So yes, the answer to the question now is, if you go about your prenup in a way that is in accordance with the approach that the courts have approved, then yes, you should be assumed that you will be held to it. So not contractually binding as such, but pretty close to it. There's a presumption you'll be held to it. So if you want to have a binding prenup, what are the conditions that you need to make to try and make it as binding as possible? Well, first of all, you need to negotiate the prenup a long time in advance. Signing a prenup anything less than 28 days before a wedding is going to cast doubt on whether actually the agreement was entered into freely or whether there was quite a lot of duress because both parties were really committed to the wedding. So that's the first thing, the time before the marriage. And I always say to clients they should really be thinking about a prenup 6, 9, preferably even 12 months before a wedding, when they first get engaged. If they think a prenup is a serious option, then they should start talking about what that prenup would cover and get some advice on it at the time so that they get it all done and dusted, it's all signed, it's in the bottom drawer before they're actually really getting into the thick of the fun of the running up to the actual wedding. So as well as being entered into a period of time before the marriage, there needs to be no other evidence of duress. So this agreement really needs to be entered into freely by both parties. Both parties also need to have understood what it is they're signing. So that means they need to understood not only the legal jargon in the document itself, but also the implications of the document for them. So what it means that they're giving up or what it means that they will be receiving in the event of a divorce. And the final thing is that the agreement needs to also to meet the basic bases that a court would cover if there was a subsequent divorce. So often if a prenup was drafted to say one person would get everything and the other person would get absolutely nothing, even if the parties have been married for a long time and they've had children and they built up assets together, then that is unlikely to stick because a court's likely to say it needs to meet the basics. It needs to meet both parties' needs. But if a prenup has been sensibly thought about and the couple have thought about the various different scenarios and they've made sure that there is an element of fairness about the provision for each of them, even if it means ring fencing one asset, so an asset inherited from a grandparent, then that is more likely to stick. It's more likely to be upheld by a court. So yes, a premarital agreement can be a very good idea if you have assets that you think it will be sensible to be clear about what should happen to them in the event of a divorce. But you need to make sure that a premarital agreement is negotiated in a way that it's likely to carry the most weight and therefore you're likely to need some specialist legal advice about the particulars of your circumstance, and therefore what a particular premarital agreement for you should look like and whether it's likely to be upheld. As always with the family law vlog, if you want to understand more or how a particular situation could apply to your circumstances, then you should take specialist family law advice. My contact details and the contact details of my colleagues in the Mills and Reeve family team are at the end of this vlog.